It's a local election, but a test for Vladimir Putin. The Russian president's party takes a hit in Moscow's poll. That's come after weeks of protests against the government. So, how will Putin deal with this setback? And is he losing influence? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. It sparked some of the biggest demonstrations the country has seen in decades. Thousands took to the streets over the summer in Russia after some of the Kremlin's fiercest critics were barred from a regional ballot. But despite Moscow's attempt to silence them, the ruling party lost a third of its seats in the capital in Sunday's local election. President Vladimir Putin's united Russia still holds a majority, but the opposition Communist Party has almost doubled its number of seats. So, what does this mean for the national elections in 2 years' time? Is Putin beginning to lose his popularity? We'll be speaking to our guests in a moment, but first, Step Vasson has more from Moscow.
Pretty interesting developments here in Moscow, and also a politically complicated scheme that has played out. For sure, United Russia, the ruling party of Vladimir Putin, has lost more seats here in Moscow than ever before. But on the other hand, they still have a majority. So it's more like a psychological loss for a party that is simply not used to losing and has been having a monopoly position here in the City Duma for such a long time and has been in power in Russia for such a long time. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that now there's an independent opposition in the City Duma, because they were simply banned from running in these elections. The opposition has then called for this so-called smart vote, voting for anyone basically who can beat United Russia. And this has now resulted in a win for the Communist Party, who has never been a real opposition party. So it's not likely to change much of the policies, but it does give a strong signal to President Putin and the ruling party that their power base is kind of shaky right now, and that the opposition can't be ignored and crushed that easily anymore. Step Vasson, Al Jazeera, Inside Story.
All right, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Moscow, Viktor Olevich, lead expert at the Moscow-based think tank Center for Actual Politics. From Kiev, on Skype, Ilya Ponomarev, founder of the political movement Left Front and former member of parliament from 2007 to 2016. And from London, Anna Matveyeva, visiting senior research fellow at King's College London. Welcome all to the program. Anna, I want to start with you. These elections and the outcome, how significant is this development?
They are significant for Moscow because this is the first time since the 90s figures who are associated with sort of liberal democratic opposition had some kind of electoral success. But it is not significant in terms of political party development because they still do not have any kind of organized vehicle to press their demands. But they acquired a platform, they acquired a voice, and they, for the first time, showed that they are electable. But the balance of power is clearly not in their favor, and also we should not extrapolate what has happened in Moscow to the rest of the country, which lives in quite different universe.
Viktor, is this a wake-up call for Vladimir Putin? And if so, how big of a wake-up call is it?
Well, of course, it's a wake-up call for the Russian political system. Anna has correctly pointed out that since actually the early 2000s, the liberal parties have not been represented in the State Duma. And the results of the elections to the Moscow City Council, the so-called Moscow City Duma, which went a bit differently from what the leading, the pro-Kremlin United Russia party had expected or had wanted, show that there is a possibility, a growing possibility, a growing sense that in 2021, in the upcoming elections to the Russian Duma, the Russian parliament, there could possibly again be liberal members of parliament, representatives of liberal parties included. So these elections that have just ended, they're showing a growing frustration on the part of voters, and not just in Moscow. I would remind you that in the Far East, for example, in Khabarovsk region, the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, which is one of the parliamentary parties, had gained significantly over the United Russia Party. And in fact, in the elections to the Moscow City Council, a number of United Russia members had shown themselves to be sort of titled as independent. So they ran as independents instead of United Russia members of parliament, because they thought that the party affiliation might negatively impact their electoral chances. So it is possible that in the next months preceding the elections to the State Duma, there could United Russia could possibly morph into something a different political. There could be significant changes to United Russia. There could be more flexibility shown on the part of the Kremlin, and possibly there could be more alliances between parliamentary factions with United Russia in the coming months.
Ilya, just how powerful is the City Duma? We're talking about this specific election, and also how effective can the opposition be now?
Well, you see, if we are talking about the political weight, we will not see very much of significance of what have just happened. Firstly, United Russia, yeah, indeed, they were not branded as United Russia. They were all nominated as independents, but nevertheless, we understand that it's United Russia. They still control the majority over this Moscow City Duma. They control almost 60% of the seats. Just before they were controlling 100% of the seats. Now it's 60, so it's a significant change, but still they control the majority. But altogether, Moscow City Duma is a very strange institution. Moscow is at the same time a city and a region according to the Russian constitution. That's why self-governing instruments in the city, they're extremely limited, and they're very much controlled by Moscow City Council, by the mayor's office. And that's why this meaning has a lot of symbolic meaning, because we will see really independent candidates, not so much of them, but still independent candidates. But we will not see any changes in terms of political structure of the country.
Anna, how did Kremlin-backed candidates do in the rest of the country?
Basically, they have done extremely well because the acting governors and those governments who have been in power for a long time, they all have been elected. So nobody has been seriously challenged. We do not even have the second round because there were expectations that there will be more contestation, and in some federal regions we will have the second round of gubernatorial elections. We don't even have that, and that's where the real power lies. Yeah, that's the level which really matter for decision-making structure. Yes, we have seen United Russia being a little bit sheepish, like in Moscow, pretty much appreciating it and accepting that it's not really doing very well with the electorate. But we also have to say that by and large people are not very active. Only presidential elections matter, and then you have turnout, yeah, real turnout. In Moscow City, we had less than 22%. In the rest of the, well, in the country overall, 41% voted. So it shows that it's not something which people feel can actually change their life, which is tremendously relevant. But overall, the authorities have enough argument to be able to claim that they have won these elections. Opposition at the same time can also claim that they have made significant gains. So both sides sort of have legitimate grounds to be optimistic and satisfied with the outcomes.
Ilya, is what happened in Moscow, this outcome, is it the outcome of a strategy by opposition who called on people to vote strategically, or is this simply a reflection of the reality on the ground and more of a referendum on Putin and united Russia when it comes to the results in Moscow?
Yeah, I think it's an objective situation way more than anything else. You see, the situation is that Putin is really losing its grounds. His party even more so. The approval ratings for Putin, the current approval rating is around 40s. For United Russia, it's 25-30%, so it's worse than that. And that was actually the reason why it was not United Russia who was nominating the candidates for Moscow City Council, but why they ran as independents. But at the other hand, people still don't see the alternative. Here we touch the issue of so-called liberal forces. We would be more correct if we will brand them as neoliberal forces. They are vastly unpopular in Russia. And even in Moscow, where they have the biggest popular support, they still cannot get the majority even with the free elections. Those political forces which can present the alternative to Mr. Putin, they are either leftists, and the majority of those candidates who won the elections in Moscow City Duma, they were nominated by the Communist Party. Many people say that they are not the real opposition, and they are right. They are not the real opposition, but nevertheless, that's what people would like to vote for. And there is no such organized true opposition in the country.
Viktor, as you heard Ilya speak there, he talked about united Russia becoming more and more unpopular. What about Putin?
Well, formally, Putin is not the head of United Russia. He is not a member of the party. And so if the party eventually has to morph into a somewhat different political movement, or if it has for political purposes to form coalitions with other parliamentary parties in order to keep the political system along the same course, that will not significantly affect his future or his the political capital that he has built. However, the general frustration on the part of the population with the pension reform, with a number of other issues, with the economic issues that have popped up in recent months and years, of course, they are going to negatively affect the electoral chances of United Russia or other parliamentary parties possibly in the future. And it remains to be seen how that is going to be dealt with. But the more flexibility the Kremlin shows in its electoral policy, the more stable the situation is. I also would like to note, as far as the regional elections, many of the governors that were just re-elected yesterday, were actually elected for the first time. Whether it's Alexei Texler in Chelyabinsk region, or Pasler in Orenburg, or Kharkordin and Limarenko in the Far East, they have been newly appointed by Putin because the Kremlin actually keeps tabs on the governors that show low ratings. And when a governor is in a low rating category for a long time, usually the governor of that region gets sacked pretty quickly and gets replaced by another governor. And we have seen this in a in a significant number of regions in the last several months. And most of these governors won very easily. The exception would probably be Alexander Beglov in St. Petersburg, who had a more difficult election, and one of his challengers, a filmmaker, Bortko, had to get out of the election to make it, in a way, this made his election easier, and the results are still being counted. But overall, I would agree with Ilya and Anna that with the gubernatorial elections, United Russia showed very good results at this point.
Anna, it looked like you were nodding to some of what Viktor was saying. Did you want to add something?
Yes, I would like to add that what is remarkable about Moscow elections were not actually the results, because we don't really know what these newly elected deputies are going to do with their power, but that the city authorities managed to create such a big issue out of the campaign and banning candidates and having pushback from the street and provoking people to more protest action, which they otherwise would have taken, that the capacity of the authorities to panic and see the problem where there is really not much of an issue, that's a more dangerous thing. That we have seen pretty tame elections in Moscow, fairly orderly, but we had a really very volatile campaign before that and totally disproportionate security response. That tells us volumes about how the authorities really feel and what their confidence level is like.
Ilya, analysts have said that the Kremlin was reluctant to allow Alexei Navalny, he's the prominent opposition politician, of course, to allow his allies a way to gain more power ahead of far more significant parliamentary polls that will happen in 2021. With the loss of these seats in Moscow, what does that mean for the opposition going forward into the 2021 elections?
Well, in Moscow elections, there were several of different opposition groups that were planning to take place. There was a group associated with Navalny, as you correctly said, and there was a group associated with Dmitry Gudkov and Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and were others. Basically, what Kremlin allowed, they allowed only registered political party called Yabloko, all-time political left liberal party, which originates at the beginning of 90s, associated with our famous economist Grigory Yavlinsky, to take part, and they won 4 seats in this Duma. All the other candidates that we right now cheer as victors of the campaign as the opposition candidates, almost all of them were nominated by the Communist Party. And I wouldn't say that either Alexei Navalny or Mikhail Khodorkovsky or others can be treated as supporters of the Communist Party. It was just what they saw as a lesser evil. And that's why they were calling their supporters to vote for those guys. But I actually don't think that in the parliament they would behave like really opposition leaders. It would not be United Russia. It would be a psychological blow to United Russia, and thanks with that.
Viktor, Vladimir Putin's presidential term ends in 2024. I mean, there are constitutional term limits in Russia, but there are many in Russia who believe that he will find a way or is looking for a way to hold on to power beyond that, either by a constitutional amendment or by perhaps the creation of a special position in parliament. What do you think? Is that something we could see happen?
Putin is definitely not looking to remain in his position as president of Russia after 2024, but there may indeed be a role for him in the Russian political system, and it remains to be seen what the Russian political system is going to look like in 2024. That's a long time, 5 years from now, considering the fluctuations that we have been seeing in recent times in the Russian political sphere, in the Russian political arena. Much can still happen before then. And the way that order, the new political order, is shaped we are going to see that happen in the next few years. A lot of that is going to have to do with how indeed the elections, the 2021 State Duma, the parliamentary elections in Russia, turn out. That's definitely going to have an impact. And it's still there's still a long time to go. There is also a name that has not been mentioned here yet, as in connection to the elections that have just happened, and that's the name of the mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, who is in a way a loser in this election cycle, because much of the blame for what happened with United Russia and its campaign for the Moscow City Council indeed lies with the Moscow City Electoral Commission, which made decisions that negatively impacted on United Russia, which that caused disenfranchisement, feelings of disenfranchisement on the part of a significant portion of the of Moscow voters, so the Kremlin is well aware of what happened with the Moscow City Election Commission, and the political ambitions of Sergei Sobyanin could very well be curtailed as a result of this.
Anna, there were many protests in Moscow this past summer because of the discontent that opposition politicians looking to get on the ballot were disqualified and weren't able to run in the election. Of course, there was anger at how the authorities dealt with those protests. Did that feed in, from your vantage point, into the results of the election?
To some extent, yes, because those people who would have voted for this kind of candidates, young people, perhaps would not have gone to the polls if they didn't have that kind of stimulus. But we have to also say that the elections left many Moscow City residents completely cold-hearted. We have very low turnout, just over 21%. What was, I think, quite significant, that the protests were not that much about whether candidates were registered or not, but what made people really going, the disproportionate security response when people have been taken from the streets, which had really nothing to do with that whole thing. So that created more anger and momentum on the street rather than the initial action. But I'm echoing what has been said before. We do not really know what Putin really thinks, but it is a very interesting topic to speculate about the mysterious soul of the Russian president. But on a more serious note, I would say that the elections into a Russian parliament, State Duma, would be a litmus test. Whether there will be conditions for proper political party development, free and fair, whether there will be some kind of fresh blood be allowed in, whether there will be new ways of going about politics, that will be kind of the albatross of things to come.
Ilya, considering the result of the election thus far, do you believe that going forward, when and or if there are further protests, that the authorities will deal with them in a different manner?
Well, I don't see the reason for the protest at this particular moment, because those protests, they were focusing on these elections, and the elections are over. I am absolutely sure that, unfortunately, Mr. Putin will do something else in not so distant future, which would provoke another wave of protest. But this wave most likely is over. But I think that we really need to learn our lessons from those elections. We see that this power, this regime, is not unbeatable. It is beatable, and that's probably the most positive outcome of what we saw in Moscow. We can win, but then we need to create a strategy for the Duma elections. And right now, we will simply do not have the political force for which we can vote for.
Viktor, we only have about 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask you to please be quick with your answer. How much leverage, from your point of view, does the opposition have now?
Well, at this point, the opposition is attempting, at least, to claim victory in a difficult political landscape that it is working in. And it will attempt to gain as much leverage as possible from this for the upcoming State Duma elections in 2021. And that will be the next part of the next election cycle, a very important moment before 2024.
All right, we've run out of time, so thanks to all our guests, Viktor Olevich, Ilya Ponomarev, and Anna Matveyeva. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.